everyone to our session on crypto in wartime. We are here to think about how is cryptocurrency utilized by, I guess the core question is, did Russia use cryptocurrency to evade sanctions? And how would we even think about addressing that, looking at that, what data do we have to think about that, and what other ways has cryptocurrency somehow intersected with this conflict in Russia and Ukraine? So I'm Kim, I'm the head of research at Chainalysis, and I'm going to be talking to you about data and research. And we've got Andrew, head of sanctions strategy, who's going to be talking about the impact of sanctions since the war broke out. And then we have Kayla, who's going to be talking to us about product solutions and our free sanction monitoring tool. So research. I think it's important to set the stage of what was the cryptocurrency ecosystem like when the invasion broke out. What was happening already? What kind of crypto ecosystem were we looking at in Russia and Ukraine? And the reason why this is important is because it's something that we've actually been following for a long time. We put out an annual geography index that tries to quantify the amount of cryptocurrency activity at the country level. And starting 2 years ago, when we put out our first report, we saw that Ukraine was at the top of our index in terms of crypto adoption, and Russia was number 2. So 1 and 2, and this is the amount of crypto adoption per capita. Ukraine is number 1 and Russia is number 2. Since then, this is our last year's index. Ukraine is now 5, and Russia is 18. So they fell a little bit in the ranking. It's not because there's less activity in Russia and Ukraine, it's because actually other countries rose faster, especially low and middle income countries. And there's reasons why this makes sense, why Russia and Ukraine do have such robust crypto ecosystems. A big part of our research is we do interviews with people on the ground. We heard about a really tech-savvy population, a need to do international payments across borders, ecosystem where there's capital flight, cross-border payments. There's startups, a robust startup ecosystem for cryptocurrencies, particularly in Ukraine. And so this is the ecosystem. This is the crypto environment upon which we are seeing this invasion happening. And there's a lot of good things that came from this robust crypto ecosystem. I'm sure many of you heard about the donations that were facilitated by the Ukrainian government. They put up a cryptocurrency address, and in a few weeks, over $60 million in cryptocurrency payments came to those addresses. We can see it's across a wide variety of different crypto assets. And they're also, just to really nail home the point of transparency here, is they're also publicly saying what they're spending this money on. So $6 million to digital rifle scopes, binoculars, field rations, and they put all of this on their website. I think there's an open question of would they have been able to raise this much money had there not been two things. One, cryptocurrency. Would they have raised this much money if there was no cryptocurrency kind of push to raise money? And would they have raised this much money if they didn't have this robust crypto ecosystem that already existed? But there's also some negative things that can come from this really, what we talked about, robust crypto ecosystem in Russia and Ukraine. In Russia, for example, we've talked about the problem with ransomware. One of the things that have been a hallmark of our crypto crime research that we put out every year has been tracking ransomware. The year before last, we called it the year of the ransomware attack. And last year, ransomware continued to grow. And 74% of all identified ransomware payments have some sort of footprint in Russia. Maybe it's the administrators are Russian. Maybe there's some code that we've been able to identify that says, do not attack Russian-speaking countries. So that's a kind of a tell of the MO behind the attack. And so this is all the context upon which this invasion is happening, the crypto context. So now we can ask the question of, did Russia use crypto to evade sanctions, and how did the invasion impact crypto markets? I can tell you what we expected. When we heard about the invasion, when we heard people saying that oligarchs are going to be using billions of dollars to putting billions of dollars into cryptocurrency and sending it across borders, we thought, hey, maybe we're going to see some destabilization in some of the main market macro metrics. We're going to see funds flowing out of Russia. We're going to see the ruble trading pairs just skyrocketing. And that's what the kind of your first instinct might be when you're thinking about, okay, there's a lot of crypto crime in Russia, there's this invasion happening, and we know that oligarchs might suddenly be sanctioned and need to move large quantities of money into to protect that wealth from being frozen. And that's not what we saw. So what did we see? These are, sorry about the ones there, but these are kind of the main data points that we can look at to ask to answer these questions. We can look at the net flows out of exchanges. We can look at what happened within businesses that we've identified that operate within Moscow city specifically, which is the business district in Moscow. And even more specifically, we can ask what happened to the businesses that are in one specific tower called Federation Towers. We talk a lot about that in our crime report. It's a tower, it's a nice tower, and it is home to many businesses that are known to be laundering money from ransomware criminals and darknet marketplaces. We can look at trading against the ruble, Russian whales that we've identified through a variety of heuristics, and what's happening on Hydra, which is one of the biggest it's been sanctioned now, but was the biggest darknet marketplace in the world, which was also a known money laundering operation. And we can look at deposit addresses that are known to be OTCs or suspected to be OTCs with a Russia footprint. And the macro story here is that a lot of these didn't have any notable outlier activity, looking at everything at a macro level. If the top right, we can see ruble trading volumes. There's a little bit of a spike around the time of the invasion. That could be because of the depreciation of the ruble. The currency depreciated quite a lot in that time period, but nothing out of the norm. I mean, we see just a few months before a much larger increase in activity. We can see the value received by Federation Towers in Moscow City. On the far right, stable, nothing really left, nothing out of the ordinary. Hydra, stable, declining a little bit until it was eventually kind of shut down with the sanctions. So what this taught us is that crypto in wartime, especially in this context, the macro indicators aren't where you're supposed to look. And you're not going to see this kind of really obvious up and to the right exodus of funds off of Russia-based exchanges. And that actually, if you think about it a little bit more than just what your hot take is in an instant, that makes a lot of sense. The people who were going to be impacted by this event knew about it for a long time and were able to make arrangements ahead of time. But also, that's just not how money laundering works. And that's something we've looked at for a long time. People who need to launder large quantities of money, they know how to do it in a discreet way, and they leverage OTC networks that have been long established to move large quantities of money. So if you know a little bit about money laundering and sanction evasion, you wouldn't expect the macro estimates to move, because an oligarch isn't going to send billions of dollars overnight into crypto in one transaction that we can just see. So we shifted from asking these questions of looking at the macro indicators to we put on our investigators' hats, and we tried to look for instances of sanction evasion kind of in a case-by-case basis. And I'm going to go through one case study of something that we found that was, I think, interesting and worth talking about. So here we've got a Russian whale on the top right, and this is a whale that we've identified through their exposure to Russian services. Sometimes we look at time zone patterns, and we can see them leveraging 3 possible OTC brokers. And I want to draw your attention to the nested deposit address on the bottom right. This deposit address was receiving north of $1 billion in total activity and abruptly ended their receiving activity the day after the invasion happened. And then the next day, 2 other deposit addresses suddenly became active that were moving. They had never been active before. Their first time ever, they were first used the day after the invasion, and they were leveraging the same OTC wallets that previous suspected nested service 1 was using to move billions of dollars. We don't really know why suspected nested service 1 shut down. They could have been de-risked off of their platform. There could have been a variety of reasons as to why it shut down. But the timing of these transfers is really suspicious. And the connection to the Russian whale is also very suspicious. And it's an example of you wouldn't see this in the macro kind of transfers and the macro I guess trends, but you do see it when you're looking at one-off cases. And the last thing I'll say about this is that we use some interesting techniques in order to identify it. You can get really advanced and you can ask our data really specific questions. So what we did here was we said, give me all of the deposit addresses that became active after the invasion started with exposure to Russian whales or Russian services that were doing more volume than X amount. And then we get this list that we can investigate. And this is just one of them that was particularly interesting, one of many deposit addresses that we were able to analyze. And I think that the thing that it does that I find the most interesting is that it lets us kind of merge into the world of being proactive with our data and our data sets in order to find interesting leads that we can then pass on to the right people. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Kim. So I'm going to kind of take this a little bit of another direction and talk more about sanctions and the regulatory angle and the evolution of crypto-related sanctions since the start of the war. But before we can get into the start of the war, I wanted to just give a little bit of backdrop on what's happened historically. Now, these are just a few examples, but what you can see primarily over the course of time, and what I mean by crypto-related sanctions are those that include cryptocurrency addresses in their identifiers or their designation. And for the most part, what you're going to see are entities involved in ransomware, so cyber criminals, or exchanges facilitating that ransomware activity, being the primary actors in this space. So in December of 2019, you had Evil Core and its owner Maxim Yakubets. In September of 2021 and November of 2021, you had Suex and Chadex for facilitating ransomware activity. You also, in that time frame between October of 2020, had one OFAC advisory, and then in 2021, an updated advisory. I wanted to just kind of point out in the middle there, you have Southfront. That's one of the one-off cases that is not related to ransomware. It's a misinformation group in Russia that is tied to the FSB. Now, with that said, primarily the fact that most of it was focused on cyber criminals themselves and the exchanges facilitating them, with that in mind, seeing kind of where this industry is going to go is what I'll talk about in the next slides. But with that said, while most of these entities that have been sanctioned and involve cryptocurrency have been Russian, it's not all that surprising because Russia does account for a disproportionate share of activity in several forms of cryptocurrency-based crime. Obviously, particularly with that focus on ransomware and money laundering related activity. But just for example, and kind of diving into what Kim was talking about a little bit earlier with Moscow City, The exchanges located in Moscow City receive hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency every quarter. And some of the estimates that we have show that the illicit and risky addresses that account for that are 29 to 48% of that overall activity, with, as Kim also mentioned, a focus on Federation Tower, which you'll see SUEX being located in, as well as later on Garantex, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So now kind of walking into what's happened since the designation, or since the sanction, or the invasion began, is firstly talking on a macro level of what those sanctions look like, not just with a relation to cryptocurrency. So we've had an extensive amount of sanctions sweeping across all of Russia, across all industries, everything from major banks, financial executives, oligarchs, their family members, their children, even their yachts, weapons manufacturers, which seems a little bit more obvious, members of the Russian government, including the State Duma. You have state-controlled television, shipping industries in its entirety, even their entire fleets of vessels that they own. And then, of course, you have the cryptocurrency actors. So what does that look like, and why is it different, and why is this an evolution of the sanctions with regards to cryptocurrency? So what we see first was on April 5th, OFAC designated 2 Russian-based services, the first of which being Hydra Market. It's a darknet market that was in existence for over 6 years and responsible for processing over $5 billion worth of crypto during its lifetime. And it is the first darknet market to be designated by OFAC. So this is indicating a shift in identifying new actors helping facilitate illicit Russian activity. So now we're seeing not just the actors themselves, not just the exchanges facilitating, but a darknet market, which is a further indication of broader comprehension by regulatory bodies that are looking into these types of things. Next up is Garantex, which was also sanctioned, more so along the lines of what we were talking about before. This is another cryptocurrency exchange that was in existence for about 3.5 years, processed over $2.5 billion worth of crypto in its time frame. And in these designations, OFAC included 120 addresses in that designation. And I say that because it's really important understanding what the impact of a designation has on the blockchain and having the ability to do blockchain analytics like we end up ultimately doing. I know Pradima talked about this in her conversation this morning, but with Hydra, we have over 5 million addresses that are involved in the Hydra network, with just 117 addresses included in the designation. For Garantex, it was 1 Bitcoin address, and we have over 100,000 addresses that we're covering. So what I like to kind of think of this, coming from a traditional financial institution background, is that this is very similar to an expanded coverage of OFAC's 50% rule. Now, if you don't know OFAC's 50% rule, essentially what it states is that any entity that is 50% or greater owned or controlled by a sanctioned party is also considered sanctioned. So OFAC might only put 1 entity on the SDN list, but as an institution, you're responsible for capturing any risk exposure to any entity that is 50% or greater owned by that entity. That often takes additional vendor tools, additional research, additional resources in order to capture that underlying risk. Now, the difference here is that all you need to do is look at the on-chain heuristics through looking at things like co-spending, change address analysis, and then you get into these big numbers that we were just talking about. So the impact of the ability of designating just a few addresses can lead to coverage of an entire network pretty quickly, and also be an effective way of covering your sanctions risk exposure and mitigating that risk if you are a user of blockchain. Sorry, I am skipping ahead. So then second up, on April 20th, OFAC designated a virtual currency mining operation by the name BitRiver. Well, BitRiver AG is in Switzerland, but its core entities are based in Russia. Now, while with BitRiver, there were no addresses included in the designation, the reason I wanted to flag this here is 2 things. One, this is the first time OFAC is targeting an entity in the cryptocurrency space without crypto addresses and not for illicit activity specifically. Part of the sanctions on Russia were to capture and affect the entire economy. And what this is saying is that cryptocurrency mining is a big enough industry and a big enough focus that stopping that activity in Russia is making an impact. So even though there were no addresses included in this designation, it really goes to show the comprehension and the impact and importance of cryptocurrency mining in the ecosystem and what it means for Russia. So finally, walking into May 6th, we have Blender.io. You might mostly be familiar with this because their primary focus for being designated was for being involved in laundering the DPRK funds as a result of the Ronin hack. However, it was also mentioned that they were involved in Russian crypto crime, supporting the facilitation of ransomware actors, et cetera. The difference here, and this is the third type of new cryptocurrency service we've seen sanctioned since the beginning of the war, is that this is a mixer. So now we've had 3 different types of cryptocurrency services not related to an exchange or to a cyber criminal themselves, but we've had a darknet market, we have had a mining operation, and a mixer get designated. So this really goes to show a broader comprehension across the entire ecosystem. Like thinking back just 2 years ago, would you think that a mixer or a mining operation would get sanctioned? Most people didn't even know what these things were. I'm one of them. So getting to this level of comprehension shows such an amazing evolution in the regulatory space and just the broader crypto community of how fast we're developing in this space. So what's next? Well, obviously a lot of that depends on what Russia does in Ukraine. But obviously in an attempt to cut off access to services that are supporting the Russian Federation, Russian elites to evade sanctions, and those services involved in laundering funds on behalf of Russian groups. You could see a little bit more of the same. I actually started writing this deck mentioning mixers before Blender got sanctioned. So it goes to show just any kind of way that someone could facilitate the movement of illicit funds can be a focus. So anything within the cryptocurrency space, from mixers to darknet markets to mining operations, further cybercrime groups, exchanges, could all be part of future rounds of sanctions. However, since the start of the war, it really goes to show how far this has brought light to crypto-related sanctions designations and leading into new territory with every designation in this space, showing the evolution of crypto comprehension in the entire crypto economy. So with that said, I am going to hand it off to Kayla, who's going to talk more about our sanctions API.
Thanks, Andrew. Hey, everyone. I'm Kayla. I'm a product manager at Chainalysis, and I'm going to talk to you about the free sanctions screening solutions that we released recently, which include an Oracle and an API, and I'll talk about what those are and why we released them. As these two highlighted, Russia's invasion of Ukraine really put sanctions in the global spotlight. And for the crypto community, that meant renewed questions about whether all the crypto companies out there have sanctions compliance programs. And the good news is that lots of them do. That's great, right? However, this is an exciting time for crypto, and I could go to a hackathon tomorrow and spin up a decentralized application. Maybe I will, right? Maybe I'll skip links tomorrow and do that. Who knows? Don't know how happy my team would be. But it's really, there's all kinds of new innovations coming out, and a lot of people are going, and it's become very possible to build new things really quickly. So for us at Chainalysis, we thought, why not deliver simple tools that anyone in the world could use to enable them to start their approach to sanctions compliance? So that's kind of like where this came from. So the first one of these we released is an Oracle, the Chainalysis Oracle. This is an on-chain way to make data available. So anyone who has access to the blockchain can query this data from the Oracle. So the target users for this are Web3 organizations, DApps, DAOs, NFT marketplaces. And the reason for that is that the on-chain Oracle lives like on Ethereum-based networks, so Ethereum virtual machine-based networks. So it's easiest for those kind of organizations to access. So what it does is it validates whether an Ethereum virtual machine address is on OFAC's SDN list. So it's not all of the addresses that are on OFAC's SDN list. It's just the ones that have that EVM address format. So it's like kind of a subset. And it's possible to use it on-chain or via Web3 API. There's 2 different methods. And it serves as a first step towards sanctions compliance for some DeFi teams. There's been a couple of teams that have already announced that they're using this on Twitter, which has been great to see. But yeah, it's an exciting free tool. Okay, second one, this is the Sanctions API. API is a more traditional method to make automated data available for anyone in the world to access. Again, this is also free. You can go and sign up on our website. You can see the sign up form there. I'll include the link at the end of the presentation in case you know how to use an API and you want to check it out. And the target users here are the same as the Oracle, but then also including early new VASPs. Some businesses are not in DeFi that are getting started, so they might not want to use an on-chain Oracle that's meant kind of for DeFi. So this also helps them out too. And we've also had some kind of, all kinds of random people signing up for it as well. So really, just feel free to sign up yourself. What the API does is it validates if any crypto address is on OFAC's SDN list. So it includes data that's beyond what's in the Oracle. It includes also the other OFAC sanctioned addresses. And if the address is sanctioned for the API, it'll share the full designation. So whenever OFAC designates an address, they include like a full text description. You can see kind of a piece of what the API shows here that says something like Pakistan-based second-eye solution, some information like that. So it'll also give you back that in the API response. And again, this is a method to serve as a first step towards sanctions compliance for any organization. Okay, so these free sanction screening tools include just a fraction of the data that's available in Chainalysis products, and I can't emphasize that enough. Andrew highlighted, as did Pratama, that earlier today, that there are over 5 million addresses that we have in the Hydra marketplace cluster at Chainalysis, and that there's only a tiny subset of those, like I think it was 117, that were included in OFAC's designation. The other example you gave as well, also very, very illustrative, 100,000 addresses in the Garantex cluster at Chainalysis versus one address that's on OFAC's list. So both these tools include very small subsets of information compared to kind of the larger Chainalysis data set. So any paid Chainalysis customers here, don't worry, you're covered if you have the paid tools. You don't need to use this. You can test it out, but it's not required. Feel free, but again, not required. Emphasizing how limited this data is, yet there's been big uptake. We've actually had hundreds of users using this even just within the first month since they launched, and we've had thousands of signups. And we think that's because there's a really big demand with crypto being so exciting. I mean, it's always exciting, but especially right now, there's a lot happening for the newer businesses and initiatives that are being launched to be able to use tools like these. So far, just some examples of some cool applications we've seen. It's been integrated into DeFi wallet auth platforms. So if you're going to interact with DeFi, especially often via like a user interface, you can have a wallet that's managed by a third party. So this is like a way to have it integrated kind of for all the users of that wallet. On-chain KYC providers, so that's like a way to take KYC and put it on-chain, kind of like it sounds like, it's integrated there as well. Peer-to-peer exchange websites, that's more of a traditional vast application. This picture is actually of a peer-to-peer exchange website that added it. You can see they have this UI check that you can go and put in any crypto address and check it out. Also some crypto accounting software, pretty cool. Didn't expect this to go there, but it did. And also more. So again, here's the link at the bottom. Feel free to go check it out yourself. And yeah, we're excited to see where this goes next. Yeah.
Questions you can. Good thing this is not ticking. It just looks impressive. Question. Thank you very much for the presentation. This is really good and really important, especially given the circumstances and the name of the session. Question is for Kim. You mentioned in one of your slides that you didn't see any spikes in the activity in Russia. I'm wondering if you've seen maybe spikes like this in, let's say, Russia-friendly grayer jurisdictions like maybe Dubai or other places, because as far as I understand, Russian oligarchs don't necessarily keep their money in Russia. They prefer to store it somewhere outside.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that the answer would be that we are identifying sanction evasion. We are seeing it happening through many, many investigations that we're running through proactive address investigations from doing these kind of complex proactive queries, but also monitoring addresses that have been on our radar already in various jurisdictions all around the world, sometimes in Russia, sometimes on international exchanges, and sometimes in other places. But the point is that it's not happening. It's not happening at this macro level where we're going to see our Dubai estimates are suddenly, or any country's estimates are suddenly increased. If only, yeah, I mean, that's, to thoroughly answer your question, we'll have to kind of break down how we calculate our country level estimates. It's an estimate, and it involves a lot of activity happens on international exchanges that are used by people all over the world. And so our estimates take the web traffic shares of people visiting those sites. So to some degree, our estimates, we do what we can with these estimates. But the point is that the way that we're seeing it is in the tens of millions of dollars going through well-established OTC money laundering networks that wouldn't kind of disrupt the stability of crypto markets around the world. And we also put out another blog that just in this dream scenario of all oligarchs moving all of their money into crypto in one night, how much liquidity could crypto markets actually handle? How much could mixers actually handle? And it's something that the crypto markets actually wouldn't even be able to absorb. So yeah, I think that basically the answer to your question is it's happening in a variety of ways that every money laundering network is organically built up in a different way over a period of time. And in some instances, there might be a certain geographic footprint. In other instances, it would be different. And it's very specific on the needs of this money laundering organization, the types of people, what they've built up over time. But it's not going to be this kind of macro approach that many people all simultaneously adopt all at once in kind of cahoots, because that's not what we're seeing. Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Carl. Two quick questions. Could apps that allow for the transfer of funds be hacked? Number one. And number two, could we inadvertently be provided info about soldiers in Ukraine and others receiving crypto?
Would you repeat the first part?
Yeah. Could apps that allow for the transfer of funds be hacked?
Transfer of funds be hacked? Which one?
Apps that allow the transfers of funds can be hacked.
I mean, yeah, I think that's plausible. We've seen entities, have money hacked, but I don't think that's, really super close to what we've been looking at here with relation to the sanctions evasion in Russia, and haven't seen anything like that in this specific case.
I mean, hacking is a really important part of crypto crime, especially this year with the growth of DeFi, and we're profiling the actors behind many of these hacks when we can. North Korea being one organization behind many of these DeFi hacks, and it's possible and carried out in a variety of ways. Code exploits, age-old phishing, inside job. We see it all. So, and your second question was about Ukrainian soldiers?
Well, yeah, 1 second. Oops. It's, oops. Yeah, number two, could we inadvertently be providing information about soldiers in Ukraine and others receiving crypto?
Do you want to take that?
So we don't collect personal information. It's all at the entity level, and so we are looking at exchanges, services, any crypto-related services, but we don't examine anything at a personal level. So no, I don't think that would happen.
Hello. Have you seen any of these crypto addresses occurring in fiat transactions typically undertaken by a financial institution?
Sorry.
So the sanctioned crypto addresses which are published by OFAC, we as a bank would monitor them in our fiat transactions. In your interactions with your other clients who might be traditional banking institutions, have they seen such crypto addresses or any of their child relationships occurring in such fiat transactions?
So I haven't come across anything. I think there is definitely a challenge with how fiat currency manages some of these cryptocurrency entities and their risk. Obviously, a lot of cryptocurrency exchanges or darknet markets or mixers, that's not going to be their operating name, their LLC name, so there's going to be a corporate entity behind those names. So A, that might not always be included in a designation, but it might not be part of it. There might not be a corporate entity behind it. B, typically, in the originator to beneficiary information field, which is where the information is provided for a transaction, I've never seen, at least on the other side of the house, an entity using a cryptocurrency address or a transaction hash in that information field. So I don't know how much that correlates directly. I think it would probably be more indirect at the point of the funds moving within the cryptocurrency ecosystem to an exchange, and at the exchange, you might have a fiat output point. But I haven't heard of any instances where there's been like one of the addresses designated has been referenced in a payment by a fiat currency entity.
Hi, my name is Umar, and I'm a sanctions investigator. I have two questions, and I'm not sure if you know the answer. But do you know where the OFAC stands in terms of assets leaving a crypto wallet prior to the designation date and arriving to the designated entity after it got designated? Do you know where the OFAC stands on that?
So I think there's a lot of regulation that still needs to come out regarding cryptocurrency, but the traditional stance from OFAC is always going to be once the designation occurs, any movement of funds with a designated party after that would be considered a sanctions violation.
Okay, and prior to that it wouldn't?
Yeah, so anything occurring prior would not be a violation of sanctions. Okay. Obviously, it's helpful to be aware that that's occurred. On the traditional fiat side, when a designation occurs, oftentimes banks will do a look-back review to see if they've had historical exposure to say, hey, listen, maybe we need to take a look at this customer and who they were doing business with just for the sake of de-risking, but not necessarily with regards to any reporting requirements, certainly not a reporting from an OFAC perspective.
Thank you.
Okay, I have another one. So why do you think that the darknet market Hydra was not designated sooner?
You're going to have to ask OFAC for that one.
And then if I can follow up with the third one.
On a serious note, though, I think part of it is this comprehension of the crypto ecosystem and being able to understand who the illicit actors are, who are the ones facilitating versus the bad actors themselves, and where that all falls into line. And I can't speak specifically for OFAC, but obviously as cryptocurrency comprehension expands across all industries, I think it just brings to light actors like darknet markets, like mixers, like mining operations.
Thank you. And one more, which might not be for you guys, but if maybe we could try to take a shot at it. So I've read one of the really good reports where you've kind of Chainalysis traced most of the ransomware activity. Like you said, it led to Russia, right? And it's easy to identify as to how, one way or another. My question is, so let's say we did trace it to Russia. Like, now what?
We work with law enforcement and other partners, so it really ultimately is up to them and their investigations. But we have, the product obviously that can help lead to the path of an action point. Obviously, as long as cryptocurrency stays on the blockchain, you're not able to seize it, but it's at that point it hits an exchange trying to get the transfer out point, is where you get that actionable time frame.
And we did see a Russian law enforcement go after ransomware criminals. The arrests were made earlier in the year, and so a lot of these efforts are international law enforcement working together to get these arrests, but there is some jurisdictional, at a certain point you have to. And another thing I'll say on that is we've been identifying for quite some time this concept called the supply chain of a ransomware attack, where ransomware attacks are extremely global. There's not just one person anymore that's carrying it out somewhere in Russia. These are organizations, businesses that work like a business and have, we have NetWalker, which has footprints in Russia, yes, and the arrest was made in Canada. And it's because there are kind of links in the chain that you can kind of cut at. And so even if maybe one person in the ransomware group is in Russia, there's going to be people around the world, people traveling even, where you have an opportunity to make an arrest.
I wanted to follow up on the question of the gentleman a moment ago regarding when something's identified as being on the OFAC list. And I think recently in particular with the activity around Hydra and Garantex that I believe that Chainalysis has gone back and been able to identify some additional wallets that were tied to the exchange. And I guess, have you had any conversations with OFAC in terms of how, where something went on the list on April 5th, for example, you identified on the 10th some additional wallets, but there may have been transactions between the 5th and the 10th. And ultimately, those wallets are now identified as being with an OFAC sanctioned party of how entities are supposed to handle that. I mean, the technology is great, but it's taking us to a different place in the work that's being done out there.
Yes, I mean, additional addresses are always going to show up, right? With every time a co-spend occurs, more addresses are going to be included in that cluster of entities. So I think at the end of the day, OFAC is a strict liability organization. So essentially that means at the end of the day, for an exchange or a financial institution, it's ultimately on you guys. They provide the list of the entities that are responsible for you covering, and then the due diligence, the enhanced screening, the monitoring, ongoing, is up to the exchange or the financial institution. I think that's where the value of a blockchain analytics tool really comes into play, because that's automated every single time that transaction happens. So the second a transaction occurs and there's a co-spend with one of those sanctioned addresses, you're going to get that address built into that cluster automatically, and as a customer using our product, it's going to flag in your tool, immediately upon happening.
And I appreciate the strict liability regime, but are we getting to the point that using the tool is exposing us to additional liability? Because they're just things that just weren't going to be possible to know before. I mean, your product is great, but we wouldn't have known that. And there's probably no way humanly it could have been known until it was discovered through the analytics.
Yeah, I mean, same thing with traditional fiat currency. If you have an entity that gets designated, you're still responsible for all of those entities that are 50% owned, even if they're not on the SDN list yourself. So that's where that strict liability regime comes into play. And I think at the end of the day, it's expected that it will be covered. Now, I think OFAC at the end of the day is pretty fair. They're not going to expect you and fine you for unwillingly processing a transaction with a shell company that has no direct links to the sanctioned actor. You didn't do KYC on the entity and now see that oh, this was a sanctioned entity, we ignored this and allowed them to do business. It's just that they're using through their friends, family members, friends, family member, this random person to open up a company. OFAC's not going to go find you, for the most part, probably, I can't say never. But most likely are not going to do that in that instance. I think, if anything, it's giving you significantly more coverage and protection immediately and ensuring that you have a compliance program that's capturing all of the risk with any entities that are operating within that sanctioned entity's co-spending or change analysis heuristic.
I'll just make it really fast, but to answer your question, for sanction screening with name and entities, we use fuzzy matching. So we're opening up the nets a lot wider than usual, and it's just not a straight match. So if the OFAC says, okay, do the fuzzy matching because they want to, because if you go to their website, they use fuzzy matching, then maybe, but this surprised me too, really surprised. And how do you explain it to your client? So yeah, it's interesting, I really think it's interesting.
That's a good point. We don't have to worry about fuzzy matching on this, right? You just know the address and you're immediately getting identification. You don't need to worry about someone adding periods between each letter in the name. You don't need to worry about a Russian name translating from Cyrillic to English and getting spelled 10 different ways. This makes it actually a lot easier, if anything.
Yeah, I have two questions. One of my question is, do you have case study or records of cryptocurrency being used to finance terrorist activity? That's the first question. And the second question, in developing countries and Russia and other places, mobile payment is big over there. Do you have any link, do you have future link between the crypto and the mobile payment as well?
I'm sorry, I missed the second question. To quickly answer the first one.
Is there a link between the cryptocurrency or crypto transaction and also mobile payment, mobile transaction? Do you have something in future for that?
You mean for cross-chain hopping?
Yeah.
Yeah, so two things. One, when it comes to terrorist financing, we already have that as a category in our product. So we do identify any risk to terrorist financing networks. We've issued quite a few blog posts highlighting some of those investigations. One particular that comes to mind is Al-Qassam Brigades, part of a Hamas organization. They were posting a cryptocurrency donation address on their website. That's all integrated into the product so that you would see if you were exposed to it, and we were obviously aware that it's occurring. With regards to cross-chain hopping, we're already capable of doing that, and it is something I believe is in the future for a product release, but I'm not on the product side, so I will leave that to them to give some more insight into.
Just to chime in, yes, we have released cross-chain investigations.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, one step behind. Yeah.
Okay. And just summarizing, maybe you already partially answered that question, but in general, do you see a crypto as a big part of probable sanction evasion, let's say, in quote, program of Russia? Do you see it as a big risk? I've heard you say you don't see it's in a macro level, right, in the micro level, but do you think it's going to be something you're going to see in the future, or you think it's, so what's your prognosis about that?
I think that one of the things that you kind of read between the lines with this research that we do is that everything is extremely transparent and traceable and forever on the blockchain. So, and we can use advanced analytics to identify addresses and to see this happening. So I think the straightforward answer is it can't really happen at scale without being identifiable and without being investigated. And that's something that's kind of true with all crime, and something that allows for things like the crime report to happen, that allows things like, our CEO, Michael Grauer, to say this morning, like in the past 24 hours, there was 135 scams and $11 million in Lazarus Group funds that were moved. So it is happening. We have identified it happening. It's we're able to see it because of the transparency of blockchains, and it's also something that we're not identifying as being extremely destabilizing to the market and happening at scale.
Thank you. Sorry for my voice, it's probably going to be booming. So first, the only question I have is, I know previously we've seen that you guys have integrated some other like cyber data sources, such as Flashpoint, within the software. So I was curious, what other type of third-party integrations, especially on like the cyber effects side, are you guys having like in the future planned? If you can elaborate.
I mean, I don't think we can divulge too much on the data collection, but you know, we apply a range of collection from open source to any sort of investigation that can get us leads. A perfect example was our blog post. We posted about Dubai-based cryptocurrency, you know, being a potential source of evasion for real estate with regards to the Russian oligarchs. But just kind of thinking about sanctions evasion on a whole, we can apply a bunch of different methods to kind of get to the source of it. And a lot of it comes from the type of research that Kim does.
Also, to chime in for our partners team, if you're curious a list of our public partnerships, we're always happy to share it with you, and you can talk more to them too. So just let us know.
Great. Thank you, everyone.